mics. I'm so delighted to be here for this book launch of Oswald's. I ended up reading this. I'd read his previous book, The Newsroom Mafia. But this is very, very different, remarkably different, but still very gripping. I started reading it last night, more as a sort of that, hey, listen, I'm going for a launch, so I must read this book.
Right.
And I started reading it, but I must tell you, I think circumstances, sometimes the divine conspires to create a set of circumstances where you appreciate a particular novel much more because of the circumstances around you. I had been watching the news yesterday, and the news was entirely filled with the story of this young girl who had been raped on a Delhi transport bus. And by the time that I got down to reading Oswald's book, the very first scene was the violation of Princess Darshana. And he writes in an extremely gripping style. So by the time that you don't want to put down this book, you have to complete it in one sitting if possible. But as they say, all interesting books tend to be inversely related to your bladder capacity. So I got up in the middle for a leak, And when I got up in the middle for a leak, I realized that there were tears on my pillow. And I'm not an emotional sort of person. I consider myself to have pretty much seen it all, done it all. But I was actually crying. It tells me that he was able to, in certain portions, almost rip out my heart and make me feel a certain sense of vengeance. It was almost like, I think, the way there was a outpouring yesterday and today of people saying, why aren't we going after the perpetrators of such a heinous crime? Why aren't we castrating them? Why aren't we putting them to death? And he transported me back to 1545 and made me feel precisely the same way. So I would say that this is an incredible book in that sense. I think that there is the old proverb which says that it is necessary for us to believe in order for us to behave. But in fact, this tells you precisely the opposite. That in fact, some of the worst misdeeds in our lives have happened because we believed. And so to that extent, I think these sort of novels are a great eye-opener because it's not... Today, luckily, I always consider myself to be very lucky to be living in the world that we live in today. It's very easy to complain and say, oh, this is bad, the traffic is bad, and the infrastructure sucks, and so on and so forth. But the truth is that we are living in a free world, we have a democracy, and there is a lot more religious tolerance today than 1545. And it's important to read this book just to simply understand that, and to start appreciating what we have. I have regularly been called an author who combines mythology and history and fiction, but very often there are those who say that a myth is actually a religion that no one believes in. So when you stop believing in a particular religion, then it becomes mythology. So to that extent, I'm very grateful to Mr. Pereira for having written this book, and that too in the domain of religion, but having brought those events alive. And I know that while it is written in the sense of a fiction novel, so to that extent, we shouldn't take it as the gospel truth. But the one thing that I have realized in my own writing, starting with the Rosabal line, is that very often the gospel truth isn't the truth. So having said that, my best wishes for this wonderful book. Thank you, really, it was a pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Sanghi.